so good to hear the stories of what God is doing, isn't it? Yeah. God is so good. Huh? You know that song, God is so good, God is so good. He's so good to me. That was actually written by an African, translated into English. God is so good. Well, my topic today is sustainable Christian aid and development. If we embrace holistic mission, then this is a natural extension in many ways of holistic mission. I first went to Kenya in 2009, and apart from 2 COVID years, I've gone back every year since 2009, and some years back twice in the year. I went with Albert Fairweather. Some of you may know him. I know David knows the Fairweathers. And he went in the year 2000 to, in response to a young guy who'd received his evangelistic magazine that he'd published. And so he went on that invitation and did preaching and teaching there under trees in rural Kenya, and some churches were formed and planted, and a charity was then formed in Australia called Assembly Aid Abroad, and it was formed to support evangelists and pastors and elders, providing training and books, Bibles, hymn books, other resources as well. And that first visit of mine in 2009 was really eye-opening for me. Poverty was everywhere. It was there even in a much greater way than it is today. There was just a lack of everything. Lack of food, there was lack of clean water, hygiene and sanitation problems. There was a problem with housing, medical care. Widows particularly suffered in lots of ways. Widows in Kenya, and like many African countries, they get a raw deal, particularly Christian widows. In a polygamist society, if you're a Christian widow, you're now thinking, I don't want to be the brothers, because that's the option. If the husband dies, the option is that you become a brother, the brother to the husband that died, another wife. And now she's a widow, she's a Christian, she says, I don't want to be in that sort of relationship. And if she chooses to remain single, single men don't tend to marry widows. And so she's sort of on the outer. She can't move away from the brother's family because her children are owned, in a sense, by the brother's family. What options does she have? Who's going to look after her if she's got young children? Who's going to build a house for her? The mud huts get decent rain and they start to fall to bits. So it's a huge, big need. And I came away, I just felt overwhelmed when I was there. I really struggled with the needs. We were there to preach and teach and all of those things. And here I was confronted by all these needs. And so what did I do? Well, immediately I'm like, well, I'm from the rich West. I need to give to the needs. And I started giving towards the needs. And you know, before long I'm flooded with requests. I think it's ingrained, at least in the parts of Africa that I've been to, that if a child sees a Mzungu, the white man, they expect something, almost expect it to happen, and they will constantly ask. And so you are overwhelmed with then requests for help. And I can understand that, because I would be no different in that situation. But I also realise that years and years of unstructured giving had helped create a mindset of dependency. And when I came home, I was quite unsettled about all of this. And I was thinking, how can we help in godly ways? In ways that don't harm the very people that we really feel compassion for, the people we want to serve. How do we do that in godly ways? And it led me on a journey. In fact, not long after I came back, the Bible college that I'd begun studying at offered a subject called, funnily enough, Christian Aid and Development. And I just felt it was God's timing. And having done that, so that's a semester course, and I've got 3/4 of an hour to tell you a little bit about it. But it opened my eyes to seeing how there are godly ways in which we can help others. And in return, we too are helped as much, if not more. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview and some of the principles that I learned, not just at Bible college, but subsequent to that over the years in places like Kenya and elsewhere. So the other thing is I've got in my notes, I think, points 1 to 9, and I'm going to mess with your heads because I've combined some points. I've got some points out of sequence. So I'm going to talk about 1 and 4 combined, if you're wanting to take any notes. And then I'm going to jump to point number 3, and then point number 2, and then back to point number 5. So it does jump all over the place, but I felt that actually it flowed a lot better when I looked at it. So I want to talk firstly, why should we engage in sustainable aid and development as Christians? What makes it Christian? What makes it, is it a holistic, really truly holistic? And the first thing is, what is sustainable Christian aid and development? Well, it's a holistic Christian approach. It includes sharing the good news about Jesus and his love through humanitarian relief, so short-term help, emergencies if you like, then through to long-term poverty alleviation, helping people out of poverty in lasting ways. Lasting ways, that's the key. Why should Christians be involved? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One is that it's a biblical command to care for the poor. To care for the poor, the marginalised, the orphans, the widows, to feed the hungry. It's a biblical injunction. It's a moral obligation. I don't think the Bible leaves us with options, in a sense. So that's the first thing. The second is loving our global neighbour. It's an expression of our faith that links loving God with loving neighbour in practical ways. You see, Christian love is not to be limited to our neighbourhood or our nation. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, in Luke chapter 10, Jesus shows that neighbour is anyone in need. Even someone very different from us. And we sometimes lose the impact of that parable because the Samaritans and the Jews, they just hated each other. And here's Jesus telling a story that would have just exploded in people's minds. That the very one who was the helper was, in a sense, the enemy. And then he says at the end of that parable, he says, you, and by extension us, you go and do likewise. He didn't leave a lot of wriggle room, I think, in relation to what he was saying. So we should engage because it's about loving our global neighbour. It's also about holistic mission. It models Jesus' paradigm of mission. He fed the hungry crowds, he healed the sick, he cleansed the lepers. In one case, he cleansed 10 lepers, and only one came back to give thanks and to praise God. The others didn't lose their healing, but the one that came back, who was that one? Does anyone remember from that parable? It was a Samaritan. The Samaritan came back to thank God for the healing, to thank Jesus for the healing. Jesus rebuked the crowds at times, in John chapter 6, who followed him just because they were getting free food. He forgave the paralysed man in Mark chapter 2, he forgave him and then he healed him. But as we said yesterday, in John chapter 9, he healed the blind man and then subsequently opened his spiritual eyes. He healed and he taught and he preached and he healed. There was a seamless integration of word and deed, and our mission should reflect that, I think, as well. We should get engaged in it because of human dignity. Xavier's touched on this already today. Christians believe that all people have inherent worth and dignity as God's image bearers. Now, of course, that image has been marred by sin. And you could spend a whole morning on what that image is all about. It's been marred by sin, but in Genesis chapter 5, it's restated. So the implication is that we haven't lost that, it's marred. But in Christ, it is restored and being restored. And if we had to sum up the goal of the Christian life, it is to be conformed into the image of Christ. It'll never happen completely until Jesus comes. But that's the goal. Human dignity, because we see people who have inherent worth and dignity, we treat all people with respect, we serve them, we protect the vulnerable, rather than exploiting them or neglecting them. It's faith expressed in action. James chapter 2, he says, faith without works is dead. And Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5 that we should let our light shine so people can see our good deeds and praise us. No, praise our Father, your Father in heaven. Aid in development put the gospel on display in practical ways. And our engagement is in the pursuit of transformation. Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it to the full, have it abundantly. Our pursuit should be one of transformation in all dimensions of life, long-term fullness of life for communities, for people, to reach their God-given potential. This is another reason, stewardship of resources. As Christians, we shouldn't see wealth and resources as something that we've earned or have the right to. We should rather see that everything belongs to God, Psalm 24, and that we are simply caretakers, we are simply stewards, we're managers of those things, those resources, whatever they might be, gifts, abilities, wealth. We are there to manage as good stewards for the master. And so therefore we should have an attitude of not hoarding, but sharing. We should see them as gifts from God to be shared and to use them wisely for the kingdom. We should engage because there's opportunities always for the preaching of the gospel. Paul says that in Colossians chapter 4 that we're to make the most of every opportunity. And Christian Aid and Development provides those opportunities. So often, organisations that have begun with Christian mission as in the centre have shifted and become virtually secular today. We're not to see that. We're not to get so caught up with physical help and mental help and social help that we forget that the gospel is central. Mission shift is a key danger. You only have to look at organisations like Harvard University that began with such great Christian foundations and have moved so far from their Christian roots. Opportunities for the gospel abound in this area. We start with a conviction that true change comes from the power of Jesus' death and resurrection to restore all the broken relationships. Okay, so I want to move on to the question about what is poverty. What do you think it is? What's a word that comes to mind when you think of poverty? Lack. Lack of what? All sorts of things. And that is what we often and commonly think about poverty. People don't have enough water, they don't have enough food, they don't have good arable land, they don't have infrastructure, they have schools, health services, skills, knowledge, etc. So that's a common understanding. And these are real issues. So we should acknowledge that. People need these things. But if we stop there, we ignore the spiritual and relational dimensions. We assume, for instance, that if we just provide these things, then that is going to fix the problem of poverty in the world or that community. And so what happens is we drift into this mindset where, the Santa Claus mindset, where we just bring gifts from outside. And what happens is the poor become passive, just passive recipients. And we tend to see them as incomplete people whom our generosity fixes. You see the danger? And this can devalue people and cause them to actually internalise a sense of worthlessness. Bryant Myers and Giacomo Christian, they point out that poverty is much more than a lack of resources. And they say that those of us who are materially rich, we can suffer from poverty in reverse. Because we can have so much that we just no longer see how desperately we need God. Now, your generation, I think, are struggling a lot more than my generation. The boomers are the ones that probably have this problem in many ways. But I think it's so true. I think in my generation particularly, I think there is a resurgence in the younger generation. I think the stats now are saying Gen Z and millennials and that are coming to church much more regularly than boomers. I think we've suffered from this idea that, we have so much. We just can't see how desperately we need to depend on God. But Bryant Myers argues that poverty is fundamentally about broken relationships with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the environment. And these relationships are distorted by sin coming into the world, the fall of humanity. And so poverty is really more about, it's essentially spiritual. It's essentially relational. It affects both rich and poor. We share the same root problems in the West, the problem of brokenness. And Corbett and Fickett in their book When Helping Hurts summarise it like this. They say poverty is rooted in broken relationships. So the solution to poverty is rooted in the power of Jesus' death and resurrection to put things into right relationship again. And that's our starting point. There can be no truly Christian transformational development unless at some point they hear the good news of Jesus and have a chance to respond to the gospel. That's our starting point. But at the same time, we must realise that material poverty is particularly harsh. And if you get the opportunity to visit and see this firsthand, you'll see the daily struggle to survive, just to survive. Sometimes we get caught up with thinking, why don't people in these communities think ahead? Planning. It's a concept many of them struggle with. And I see it because the situation is, I need to survive today. It's a daily struggle. Many of us have never experienced it. The goal then is not simply to raise income levels, but to restore people to a full expression of humanness and help them to become what God created them to become, to be. People who glorify Him by living in a right relationship with God, with self, with others, and with creation. Okay, I want to come back to point number 2, and a question of why do we talk about sustainable Christian aid and development? Why is it needs to be sustainable? Well, one of the reasons is that many projects, and I've seen this many times, many projects are started, they continue well, they provide benefits for the community, and as long as there's resources coming from, say, the West, those projects do well. But then the funding's withdrawn, or the people are withdrawn, and what happens is it fails. In a short period of time, there's little remaining, except that in the process of development, people have become more dependent. And so it leads to greater disappointment. So we've actually quite easily do more harm than good in some cases. So sustainability means the benefits continue after outside help ends, and that the work no longer relies on us or constant outside funding. But you also need to keep in mind that even the poorest communities know something about sustainability. I'm constantly amazed at how innovative people in these communities can be when faced with survival crises. Even things like breaking down on the side of the road. I remember breaking down, I was with an Indian couple and missionary couple there, and we broke down on the side of the road. We didn't break down, we lost a wheel. The roads are terrible. And the wheel just, we all of a sudden bang, we got out and the wheel's like this. And I'm like, we're in the middle of nowhere, this is it for the day. We're on our way to a church service. And anyway, phone calls are made, there's a guy on his way, and what do? Well, the Indian lady, she started telling Bible stories on the side of the road. They're sitting up on the bank, all the kids come around first. So the kids come around first, and she's telling Bible stories, and then the adults are coming around, and so she turns to me and says, your turn. So I preached the gospel on the side of the road. The guy turned up, and somehow he fixed that wheel. I do not know how. But that day a young guy said to me, can I come with you? Oh, yeah. So we went to church. They were still singing 3 hours later, waiting for us. The 3-hour service started and continued. That young guy came back to the Bible school we were running for that week. I said at the end of the week, I want to go to the Maasai and I want to show the Jesus film. We're going to have an outreach at the Maasai. He said, I'd love to come. My grandmother works for the Maasai. The Maasai herds people, so they get others to do their agriculture. I've got a real heart for them, he says. So he came, and on the way I said, tell me, when did you become a Christian? Oh, he said, last Sunday. So here was a young guy who got saved and went straight to Bible training and then went on mission at the end of that week. And then he planted a church that's got 100-odd people in. Just lost a daughter not long ago in the riots who got tear gas in her lungs, little girl. Guess what her name was? Narelle, named after my wife. The only Narelle in Kenya, probably. And this little girl passed away recently. Pray for them. All right, where was I up to? All right, why sustainable? So we need to remember that God is already at work in these communities. God is the ultimate sustainer. Jesus is the one who through whom everything is made, and he's the one who's sustaining everything by the word of his power, Hebrews tells us. So we need to remember, on one hand, these people have sustaining abilities already, but we also need to link them to the one who's the ultimate sustainer, who's Christ himself. So we also need to ask ourselves if we leave after a project's completed, and things continue and the benefits accrue, etc., to the communities that we worked in, is that enough? Or should our aim be to actually leave sustainable growth and sustainable increasing transformation in those communities? Is it enough just to keep a maintenance of the projects there? Now, sustainability needs to operate in 4 dimensions, generally. If you think about us as human beings: physical, mental, social and spiritual. So I want to talk firstly about physical sustainability. Just go through these briefly. Physical sustainability, about providing basic conditions needed for human life, for now and for the future. So we're looking ahead. That means agriculture techniques. It means use of water. Water is such a precious commodity. We just turn the tap on, we don't even think we'd have showers, we don't even think about it. But in many billions of people around the world are struggling right now with drinking water, let alone anything else, just having drinking water. We don't even think about it. Having health systems where they can manage their own health as far as possible using local knowledge, community-based approaches, livelihoods, helping people to create wealth through small business training, savings, micro enterprises, micro-insurances to protect against disaster. That's a big, big issue we don't think about so much. And we also need to think about the environment, caring for the ecosystems as well. Sometimes you hear that statement, give a man a fish he eats for a day, teach a man to fish he eats for a lifetime. Well, they're adding now to that, and they're saying, teach him how to look after the pond. Because if there's no fish in the pond, it doesn't matter how well you're trained. It also thinks about the next generations, doesn't it? If we look after the pond. Should Christians have an interest in looking after the environment? Absolutely we should. So often we fall in this mindset, well, it's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. But this is meant to be a foretaste of the ultimate manifestation of the kingdom of God. And we should care what God cares about. The difference is that we shouldn't worship it. We shouldn't worship the creation, but we should worship the Creator. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't have a care for the environment that we live in as well. Mental sustainability. This is a real issue. It deals with the problem of the poverty of being, these deep inner wounds and the lies that people accept. That this is just my fate. Nothing can change. I'm worth nothing. And it's so common in low-income poverty areas around the world, and transformation addresses that issue. God led me miraculously to a people called the Ilimanyang people in northwest Kenya. And these people live in the desert. It's 40 degrees pretty much all year round. They live in straw huts that the women make because the men are largely lazy and the women do everything. And the men just follow the goats around. And they live in this environment. But there are 40 people out of the 2007 villages that have the same genetic condition, the same disability that I have. The predominant symptom is that I cannot sweat. And so these 40 people cannot sweat in 40-degree temperatures in the desert. And I come along. God leads me there. And none of the men that are affected have lived past 35 years of age because they all die from heat, problem of the heat. And God led me there. And after my first visit in 2022, Nancy, who's an affected woman, she wrote to me saying that, she said that people feel like a new dawn has arrived for her people. Seeing me and knowing that I have the same condition as those 40 people meant for the first time they realised it cannot be because their ancestors are cursed. That's what they believed. Their ancestors did something with another tribe, that tribe put a curse on them, and for generations they've been cursed, and this is why they suffer from this disability. The people around them said, yep, you are cursed. You're descendants of crocodiles and fish, and you bring a curse on our community. And that's how they felt for generations. Deflated, discouraged, completely worthless. And then I come along. And I say, we can't be because our ancestors are cursed, because you're a white man. And you have the same condition that we have. And I was able to talk about real hope being found in someone called Jesus, who died to take the curse on the whole world. That he's taken away the curse. Not a curse on them specifically. And he died for us, and he rose again to bring us life, real life. And so a small ray of hope began to shine in their hearts. We're not cursed. Perhaps there's hope. Perhaps there's a future. Perhaps my life can have purpose. And I could tell you a lot of stories about that, what God is doing there. A great example of a holistic mission, great examples of Christian aid and development in all categories. I don't have time. Mental sustainability. It's a real issue. Social sustainability, we need to think about that. Providing fair, participatory systems in which communities can shape their own future. Spiritual sustainability. Spiritual sustainability means that we are wanting to help a community live in ongoing dependence on God rather than on a development agency. We're going to shift it. Their mindset needs to be, we depend on God. So often, I still get asked, give me. People stand up after a church service and one by one they'll say, this is what you need to give us. And I sometimes stand up rather exasperated and say, you know what your problem is? I get a bit more blunt now, but you don't trust God enough to provide your needs. It's true. And I say, you know what our problem is? In the West, we don't trust God enough to give back what he's given us. We have the same problem. You don't trust God enough and we don't trust God enough. How about you trust God for your needs? And I go away thinking, how can I trust God with everything that he's given me for the glory of God? We need to be partnering with churches locally as much as possible. That's the key. Churches who make disciples, who make more disciples, train leaders who train others, equip Bible teachers to teach others. Help churches to become hermeneutical communities. I like that term, hermeneutical communities. Communities that read the biblical story, the Bible story, as their own story. They apply it to them in their culture, in their time. Sometimes we are prone to go, oh guys, this is how you do it. Even church services. The early missionaries, I sometimes say, why do you, in the first hour, communion, why do you sing Western songs? Old hymns, really old hymns. Sounds like a funeral service. Oh wait, yes, Jesus has died, buried. And then the second hour, they have their own songs. And those songs, they get up and they're dancing and they're singing and there's harmonies and it's fantastic. And I say, it's like resurrection. Jesus is alive, hallelujah. And sometimes we're prone to, and I say, why do you do that? It's because the early missionaries showed us how to do it. I say, you know what, you need to decide in your culture, as you read the Bible, what is it in your culture that's God-honouring, that you can use in worship? That is God-honouring. What is it that's not God-honouring? What is it that you need to be countercultural in? You need to decide that for your time, your generation, as you apply the Bible to your situation. Become hermeneutical communities of faith. Better move on. I'll be getting the wind up soon. Generally, there are 4 responses to poverty, 4 categories depending on the situation. And it's really important we understand this, because using the wrong approach can bring harm to the very people we're wishing to help. The first thing is relief. So relief is this sort of short-term, urgent help that we provide after a disaster, a crisis, an emergency. And the goal is to, stop the bleeding, save lives, reduce the immediate suffering. And so we need to come in with food and water and shelter and medicine and other essentials. It's one-way help. People are in a situation where they cannot provide towards that situation. They're in desperate need. But it should really be limited to genuine emergencies and for a limited time, a short period of time. The second one is rehabilitation. And this is to move after the emergency is over to help people and communities return to the positive aspects of life that were there in the community before the crisis. So we're moving from emergency response to longer term recovery and rebuilding. So maybe they've needed temporary accommodation, but we're moving into a situation where we're rebuilding the houses that were lost in the floods or whatever it might have been. And it's working with people, it's not just working for them. And those who are affected also plan and carry out their own recovery. So it's working with them. And then we come to development. And development is this long-term process of change that aims to improve life for everybody, both helpers and the helped. Help people to grow into who God made them to be, deepening those relationships with God, with self, with others, and with the environment. It's to empower people and communities to improve their own situation, to become self-reliant or God-reliant, breaking the cycles of dependency on outside help. It starts with understanding people's strengths, the assets that people have within the community, the resources that they have at their own disposal, not just the problems. So often we come in and we think, what are the problems here? Rather than thinking, what is it that these people have inherently that is valuable? And the last one is advocacy. Not many of us are probably in this space. It's a really interesting space to be in there, to stand up for the people who have no voice. I think Micah projects and some of these others are in this space, but most organisations are probably not in this space. But what I've come to realise too is that Christians within their own communities can be actually involved in this space. So this Nancy I was telling you about, she works for the government, the county government, as a social service worker, and she advocates for these people with disability. And she's gone to the local county government and she's told them, what you are putting out is propaganda. You are claiming credit for things that is not getting to these people at all. These people are suffering. These people have not received anything that you've claimed to have given to them. And it got to the point, one stage she said to me that she had an audience with the chief minister of that county. And he said to her, you stop. Otherwise, I'm going to pay $1 million shillings to the police to keep quiet. Such corruption. I'm going to pay $1 million shillings to your mother. That's about $10,000. And I'm going to have you killed. And so she just backs away for a while. Things quieten down, she comes back. She advocates. It's a dangerous place to be, but it's the place where I think God has put her. Advocacy. Number 6, how can we do more harm than good? Well, there's a few things here. One is, if we ignore our mutual brokenness, we're likely to do more harm than good. If we forget the fact that we are just as broken as the people to whom God has placed on our heart, we can do more harm than good. Many low-income people don't see themselves as God's image bearers. They feel inferior and powerless. And what that leads to is it can lead so often to not taking the initiatives because you're so discouraged and deflated because of the image that you have. I think some of us understand that if we suffer from low self-esteem and low self-image, isn't it? And we were talking about this the other week. We have to keep coming back to my image, my identity is in Christ. That's it. That's fundamental. Keep coming back to that. Many economically rich people suffer from a poverty of being as well. And we can develop these God complexes that Jayakuma Christian talks about, a subtle sense of superiority. We're from the West. We know better. We know more. And we think we've achieved success all on our own. And so we're in a good position to know what's best for you. Here we are, we know what's best for you. It feels good to come and save people. Sometimes Western preachers have that problem too. Like nothing better than to go and preach and 50 people come forward. And I've watched over the years, and sometimes the same 50 people that keep coming forward every time there's a Mzungu preacher that comes from the West. Sometimes we have a subtle sense of superiority, and that affects the way we help others. So that's one problem we have. The other is that when we see ourselves as givers and the poor as receivers, the poor become passive recipients. They're seen as incomplete people, and we complete by our generosity. And our low view of them can become their own view of themselves as inadequate and defective in some way, and we fail to treat them as image bearers with God-given gifts already that they have, as if God only gave useful abilities to us. We're the ones with that. And so we, sometimes in a subtle way, we help them internalise that sense for themselves. They're the receivers. Even when you say that, we're the givers. You're the receivers. It sort of places that inherent power imbalance, doesn't it? And this sense of, maybe we're just that little bit better. And it deepens their poverty and tempts us to play God in their lives. And our attitudes itself can become messianic. We can think we're the ones who have come to save, to complete their lives. It's very spiritually dangerous as well. And we have to constantly ask ourselves, what are our motives? Is it that we truly love people, that we truly love God and we love his people? And we need to confess, I'm not okay, and you're not okay. But Jesus can fix us both. The other is when we fail to listen. Giving without dignity, without listening, without partnership, reinforces the lie that people in poverty have nothing to offer. So these are the things, these are the ways, sometimes very subtly. I'm not saying we set out to do that, but sometimes these mindsets can prevail in such a way that we do more harm than good, because they feed into the way in which we help. We need to listen. I'm combining points 7 and 8. Point number 9 is a few examples. If I get to that, probably won't. I'll run through a couple of principles, because the same principles that make our work Christian also make it sustainable in many ways. So the first thing is redefine poverty and see it as a relational issue, a spiritual issue, a breakdown in relationship between God, ourselves, others, and creation itself. Real change requires relational and spiritual healing. We need to keep the gospel central. The ultimate solution of poverty is found in the power of Jesus' death and resurrection to restore right relationships. Embrace our mutual brokenness. We've talked about that. We need to see ourselves as sinners together in need of grace, and not saviours who've come to save the sinners. Let local people lead is a really important one. If we allow local people to lead, they'll probably do things in ways that maybe we wouldn't have done. That's perfectly fine. It takes we need a dose of humility sometimes. We want to put up grand buildings and even toilet blocks. No, you can't have a mud hut type toilet block with a hole in the ground. Well, maybe you can. What are you trying to achieve? Hygiene, sanitation. You can achieve those things in ways that are much better, more contextually oriented than coming along and building a Besser block, Taj Mahal. We need to match the response to the context. Does it call for relief, rehabilitation or development? And one of the biggest mistakes is continuing with relief when development should be the real response. Because what we do is we undermine dignity and self-worth when we fail to move from relief to development. We need to empower, not enable. Handouts need to be short-term. Short-term comfort, not sort of this prolonged dependency. And what happens is people move from dependency to entitlement. They become so used to getting this that they now say, you owe us. We create that. Real love equips people to move forward in sustainable ways. Robert Lupton in Toxic Charity, he says, never do for the poor what they have or could have the capacity to do for themselves, and limit one-way giving to emergency situations. Strive to empower the poor through employment, lending and investing, using grants sparingly to reinforce achievements. All right, I should have moved on. Protect dignity as much as provision. You know, we can give to meet material needs, but if we give in a way that undermines people's sense of worth and dignity, we undermine their agency, we've failed. Good help always honours the dignity of those God sends us to serve. Expect mutual transformation. It should change us as much as it changes those to whom we've come to serve. It deepens our humility, compassion and understanding what it means to be human. And we must also find our niche. You know, we always should try to work with local churches. But we've got to realise we can't do everything. Not every local church is able to do everything. We need to find where our giftedness lies and support those who have giftings in other ways. So sustainable aid and development, Christian aid and development, is at its heart showing love for neighbour for the long haul in ways that honour God, respect people's dignity, address the roots of poverty, avoid causing harm, clearly pointing to Jesus as the one who restores people and communities in every part of life. And then I have some practical examples, but have my time gone?
I'll give you 5 minutes.
Okay. The boss has spoken. All right. I've told you a little bit about Kenya. I could tell you story after story about Kenya. One of the early mistakes I think we made as AAA is to essentially support financially 40 pastors and elders with no end date. And that was a mistake, I think. After me doing that course, there was one strong conviction. It's taken 15 years to get to the position where most of these churches now are self-supporting. But if you think about it, if you're getting a stipend from the West, what incentive is there to evangelise more? I got 20 people in my church, I got 20 problems, that's enough. Amen. Or you say, why do I need to do pastoral care? Because I get the quarterly stipend. It breeds laziness and complacency. No different from the way we would be as well. Look, there's lots of things I could talk about, orphanages and schools, that the journey from dependency towards more self-sufficiency. I don't really have time for a lot of these things. I remember one guy coming to me once and said, "Can you keep paying the rent for this church, of the new church plant we've done, the building?" And I said, "Well, do you tell me, what could you do to actually, we could invest in you, that you could support that by paying the rent yourselves?" So he came back and he said, "Look, if someone would invest in a motorbike for us, we could use that as a taxi service and we could make the money to pay for the rent for the church every month." And so that's what we did. And we've never put any money towards rent ever since. We've had orphanages that have become almost self-supporting until they've decided to then open a school. And you know who I'm talking about on that one. Told you about the Ilimaniang. I just want to finish with an example about a local example. I work with a homeless ministry in a town called Nambour in the Sunshine Coast hinterland. There's a big population of homeless people in that town. It's close to services, it's close to the railway. And the Shack is a Christian-led organisation led by a pastor, Pastor Dale Dowler, and his wife Donna and his daughter Imogen. And they are just incredible people with a heart for those who are on the margins and vulnerable. And so this is a hub for homeless people to find services and material help and to get out of the poverty in which they find themselves. Many of the homeless suffer from mental health issues, if you've worked in this space, and for all sorts of reasons. Either it's been the cause or it's been the effect of homelessness. And Dale and I approached a local MP a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and we had a vision to build a tiny house community in Nambour because we'd had a block of land given to us. It was in flood area, but we figured that we could build these little houses up 1.5 metres out of flood in a tiny house community. So we went and we presented this vision to the MP and he said, "Oh, that's fantastic." He said, "I don't know if we're going to get in, there's an election coming up." Anyway, he came back before the election, he said, "If we get in, you have your $500,000. So we had some money and we wanted $500,000. They got in, we got our money after 2 years working with government. If you ever work with government, you probably understand that. We noticed a gap. There were facilities for women escaping domestic violence. There were facilities even for young women who wanted to not abort their babies and run full term. So there were all sorts of helps that way, but there wasn't help for men who were needing to transition off of sleeping rough into mainstream. And so this was the idea. And so we got the grant, we built the houses, and these houses were designed in ways, for instance, where balconies didn't face each other. Because if you're suffering from some of the mental health issues, and you're sitting on your balcony, you're looking across at someone, anything can trigger things off very quickly. So we designed them in such a way that they're in community, but they have their private space and they have their central courtyard. And then one of the 7 homes that we built is for the live-in caretaker. He's a Christian who himself was homeless, has now come off the streets, is now looking after these guys. One is used for communal activities because there's a discipleship program that starts with evangelism, invites people to accept Jesus. But it's built up a lot of skill sets with the aim that these people can transition, these men can transition into employment. They have counselling services, they have lots of wraparound services. So these guys are from sleeping rough. They've now got accommodation. They're learning to live in community. They have meetings to jointly work out the rules. They have discipleship programs that they are invited to be part of. They pay a low rent, and many of them have gained employment. They've come off the ticker list, the black list for rental, so they can now transition into mainstream and have a history that's wiped clean. A number of them have come to faith in Christ. The project's now self-funding and doesn't rely on external grants. It's an example of Christian aid and development in practice. And my hope is that this topic gives you food for thought and for you to ask God how you can be involved in a ministry that reflects his heart for the poor. Perhaps it's to pray. It should be to pray. Perhaps it's to give. Perhaps it's to go. May God bless.